that's related to anything any of us have said or related to capos or factory farms. So let's get the first question.
I'm not young anymore.
I've got a boot on.
Okay, go ahead. I'll repeat it for you.
Thank you. I want to ask Francis about the soybean competition. You plant soybeans in roll rye.
He's asking Francis about his soybean. Maybe you can repeat it.
The question was about planting soybeans in roll down rye. We did that again, and of course, this is actually, we had the worst drought in the 25 years I've been farming in Iowa this year, so we had a few problems. But it actually is looking pretty good now at harvest time, looking better. We haven't harvested yet, but I have for 3 years now, and I'm pretty encouraged by that. What it is we let the cover crop, the rye cover crop, grow up, and instead of killing it like most conventional farmers do at about this tall with Roundup, we let it grow up and it gets as tall as I am, and then we roll it down with a roller crimper that flattens it out and creates a mulch. And then we can plant a crop in there like soybeans, and right through the mulch. And then the soybean will come up through it, and the mulch keeps the weeds down, and it holds the moisture in, and it helps build the soil. So it's a really exciting thing, I think. And a lot of organic farmers are doing it, but it's something that conventional farmers could do, and I think it would be a great thing for water quality and for a lot of reasons, building up the soil.
To do who are not yet organic farmers, who are conventional farmers, what are some of the transition things like, roll down rye and all that could actually begin to make things less bad and move them in the direction that we want? What should we be advocating? What should we be thinking about?
Well, I think the first thing is for a conventional farmer to change, they have to already be thinking in that direction. I don't think you're going to change anybody's mind by anything you say. But I think there's a lot of farmers out there that feel trapped sort of in the conventional farming system that they're in today, and they're not comfortable with it. And so I think those are people that aren't comfortable with that system and would really like to find a way to transition. The ones that I've talked to that have changed, I think one of the most important things is to not talk in terms of, okay, you're going to change the whole farming operation overnight. That you're going to pick out something that they're interested in, whether it's cover crops or fruit or vegetables or some other kind of alternative crop, or whether it's alternative kind of livestock. Then do it on some part of their operation. Do it on the back side of the farm if you want to, so your Farm Bureau friends won't see you. And then, so you don't have to think about it. And then kind of get comfortable with it and make the transition sort of gradual. Now, if you've got somebody that's already, all into organic or sustainable or something like that, then that's a different issue. But you talked about conventional farmers. I think they've got to do it a little bit at a time, and then as they see it's working from them, then they'll put it out front where other people can see it.
I think a key thing is that we need to have something growing on the land all the time. If you look around Iowa in the wintertime, you see all this bare soil and no crops growing, and that's not the way nature is. The way the soil's developed is with a prairie. And think about it, we have some of the most productive soils in the world, but when the last glacier left 12,000 years ago, there was no soil at all. And these perennial crops, these prairie grasses that help make it happen, created the soil. Since we've been farming, we've lost half of our topsoil and lost 60% of our black organic carbon. So we've been deficit spending our ecological capital all these years. But if we begin to so we have something growing all the time on the soil, we start to rebuild that. We're starting to mimic that process of nature that created soil in the first place. So I think that's the first thing that we can do. And then if we can reduce tillage, and organic farmers have to struggle with that, but I think with this cover crop system that we're trying to develop, we can start to reduce tillage as well.
Iowa State just released the second of a really important piece of research. And the guy who did both of them, his name was Matt Liebman. And he used to be at the Leopold Center, and probably still is, but somebody's got to turn the lights out, I guess. But his first piece of research had a 5-year crop rotation that included oats and alfalfa, or oats and legumes. And he proved that it could be as profitable, because that's all modern farmers want to talk about. They want to talk about money, 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 money. Well, I can't make any money doing that. Well, they're not making any money doing what they're doing now. So Matt showed how they could incorporate 2 and 3 other crops in a 5-year rotation and make more money. Now, he just finished a study. He was a co-author, I believe. A younger assistant did the work that showed about how he had prairie strips. Did you see the pictures? About prairie strips. And he literally took land out of production and grew corn or soybeans in between these strips. And you know what happened? It yielded as much, or if not more. Farming less, saving more soil, and replenishing what was there. I mean, it's not like it can't be done, because it is being done.
Yeah, and let me add one thing, and then I'll pass it over to Mike here. I'm real skeptical. I'm an economist. I'm an economist for 30 years at 4 different universities, but I'm skeptical of trying to sell the idea of sustainability or regenerative farming based on economic benefits. Because even if you adopt this certain kind of strategies, you said, okay, it'll be more profitable, maybe it will be. But you haven't changed the motivation from this idea that you're going to maximize profit. And if you want to see a danger of that, just look to what's happening in organic food production. You know, organic was kind of the old word nobody wanted to talk about back in the early days of sustainability, and that's when it was authentically organic. Well, the organic farmers started making money, and so they decided, okay, we'll go organic to make money, and now we've got what I call as industrial organic. Most of the eggs come out of industrial CAFO operations today, right? Francis, you're on the Organic Standards Board. Most of the milk nowadays is coming out of the big organic CAFOs. And so what happens is if you stay with that motive of just simply this is about maximizing profit, then you end up contorting this system so it doesn't really change from what it was before. The reason we have no-till today, I would argue, is not because farmers were motivated to save soil, so maybe some of them were, but it's basically because they come up with no-till machinery so you could farm more land and you could be a bigger farmer, and it would be simpler if you had no-till. So is that really changing the name of the game? So I want to start with this idea of farmers farming as farming really should be. It's a way to make a living, but it's also a way of life. It shouldn't only be in farming, it should be everything we do.
The question was, how does a conventional farmer transition into doing it more sustainably? And my answer to that is ask the people that are already doing it. Ask Francis Thicke, ask Chris Peterson, join the Practical Farmers of Iowa, join the Iowa Farmers Union, use the Googles. The information is out there, and go ask the experts. I don't think a farmer would have to do it all at once. I do believe a transition would be the way to do it, and I'm not sure you have to hide it in your back 40. Maybe you can wear it as a badge of courage, but I'd be proud of it if I were you.
Who's next?
Yes, I have a question that might be something that David Sykes could address, or maybe all of you. It's just seeing that there's the state level is trying to restrict local control, and then above that there's federal government that might have any form of control through the Farm Bill, etc. And then beyond that there's the World Trade Organization, and my understanding is that at least some of the major hog producers are partially owned, like Smithfield, by Chinese companies, that at least some of what they produce in the United States is exported to China. And so at what point does a local issue become a international trade dispute? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, I don't know where that point is, but you're right. Smithfield is owned by a Chinese company, and while only part of the pork raised here in the U.S. goes to China, all the money made here goes to China. So, and the Chinese are very actively buying up ag assets everywhere around the world. They just don't have enough. So, I don't know how to answer the larger part of your question, but on the local part of your question, I think it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. In Illinois, we have state livestock siting. Means the state knows everything, which is kind of funny because the Republicans in the state really, really do believe in local control. And they believe in people having their own control of their own destiny. Well, I put their feet to the fire and make them do it. In Minnesota, they have local control. Minnesota, they have, I know they have it at the county level. They might even be at the township level. and you don't have to go very far in Minnesota to see the impact it's had. So the key, the absolute key, before it gets way out of your control or out of my hand or out of everyone's sight, is to grab the control back at the local level. Then you don't have the World Trade Organization or anything like that. Which, you know, to hear from all the Republicans and that gang, you know, those guys, that's the New World Order. We got to get away from that stuff anyway. But everything they do promotes it. Right. So, you know, the hypocrisy is something you'll never beat. I heard a statistic today that's just frightening. 69% of all Republicans believe the news media creates false stories to make Trump look bad. 69% of all Republicans think the news is fake. And here's another frightening statistic. 29% of the people who identified themselves as Democrats agree with that too. That's how far down the rabbit hole we've gotten at this fever pitch national level. You got to bring it back down here, where you look people in the eye and they're your neighbor, and you go to church with them, or you know, you buy a car from them, and you got to say, hey, just ain't doing that. Just ain't doing that, buddy. And it has an enormous impact. You know, ask my neighbors.
Well, I think it goes back again to we're giving economics priority over everything else. Because if you want to have maximum economic efficiency, you remove all economic boundaries. You don't have local control, you don't have state control, you don't have national control, you have a single global economy, seamless global economy. So the corporations can be free to go anywhere in the world and exploit every resources until they're absolutely all gone. And that makes economic sense. What they want is no local control as long as it has to do with economic issues. If it's purely social issues, then they want local control. So until we deal with that big issue of being addicted to this idea of more and more cheap stuff, then we'll continue to be hostage to this whole thing of lack of local control.
So I was talking about local control earlier, and the Republicans used to preach in Iowa local control. And so, except that when it came to K-votes 15 years ago, and then they started going away from that. But what they really don't want, what they really want is not local control, they want power. And now that they have power concentrated in Des Moines with the governorship and the state Senate and the House, they don't want local control anymore, because they don't want counties like Jefferson or Johnson controlling their own destiny. So the answer is we need to throw them suckers out. I was going to use a compound word there. But we need to replace the people in Des Moines and take back local control for Jefferson County, for Johnson County, for Washington County, for Wapello County. It's at the ballot box that we need to make the change. We need to get those suckers out.
I'd like to add just I feel a confession coming on. My name's Alan, and I have a brother's in the Farm Bureau. No, it's worse than that. It's worse than that. And I'm coming here with a heavy heart, my friends. My brother Richard, Norma's brother, that's his picture on the front of the book, incidentally, without the head. He's the guy without the head. Is the president of the Illinois Farm Bureau.
No!
Yeah, absolutely, guy. Absolutely, he's the president. He's a good guy. People always say to me, "Well, I'd sure like to be at your dinner table at Thanksgiving." I say, "I bet you would. There's a lot of beer, there's a lot of turkey. It's a really great time." I said, "What do you talk to your brother?" "Well, of course I talk to my brother. He's my brother." And that's the only way you're going to make headway. You have to talk to him. And I talked to him. A year ago, I was invited by Illinois State University to come over and talk to one of their classes. And I didn't know it, but they were going to have the class in a hall of 400 people at the Alumni Center. I walk in there, there's 400 people there, and like 14 kids. And really what they wanted was a debate. The Illinois Farm Bureau wanted a debate. And they had 2 or 3 people there, and I couldn't wait. And I walked in at the, oh baby, it's the Roman Colosseum and I'm the lion. And I ate those people alive because they didn't have one fact, one figure, or one idea. I'll give you an idea. It's just how the debate, it wasn't a debate, it was a massacre. They said, one young man, he's student stood up and said, yeah, I'm raised on a farm, and why are you so opposed to farmers who grow food? I said, I said, you grew up, yeah, I said, I grew up on a farm around Rockford, which is, due north of Bloomington, we're in Bloomington, Illinois. About 100 miles, 120 miles. I said, I'll tell you what, I got a $100 bill, let's you and I get in your car, and we'll drive from Bloomington to Rockford, and along the way we'll stop at farms and we'll buy food, and I'll cook you supper when we get to Rockford. I said, I love pork roast, man, I love German Lutheran, I love pork roast, sauerkraut, baked potatoes. I'd even have mashed potatoes, I said, let's stop at someplace, is there a place that we can stop between here and Rockford and buy pork roast on a farm? Oh, no. I said, well, how about sauerkraut? That's cabbage. Any place we can buy some cabbage on a farm? No. I said, well, potatoes. Surely we could stop between here and Rockford, 100 miles, on a farm and buy some potatoes. No, I didn't think so. So, okay, let's make it easy. I like milk with my dinner. Let's buy some milk. Between here and Rockford, we'll buy a gallon of milk. Can't do that. I said, what's the matter with you, man? I thought you said you grew food. You don't grow food. And you should see my two buddies from the Farm Bureau. They started crawling under the table. They knew right then and there they'd walked into the wrong place. Because all they want to talk about is what I said earlier about, and the language they want to use favors them. You start talking about food, and they turn, like what we used to do to food, they blanch. So, that's the way I would turn the argument back to them.
And I want to say 2 points on this. One, getting back to the local control point, is that we don't have local control in Iowa. We don't have it in our counties because it was taken away from us. But there are a lot of communities around the country that are taking local control back through community rights ordinances. And these are ordinances that basically invalidate a lot of the restrictions that happen, on the state level. It's the local communities taking control back and saying, we don't want CAFOs in our community, we don't want, whatever the threat is for that particular community. And there are organizations. The Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund is one such organization that works with communities all around the country. About 200 or so communities have passed these local control ordinances. They're called Community Bill of Rights ordinances, and they're taking back their power. And that can happen anywhere. That can happen here, that can happen in Johnson County, that can happen in Washington County, anywhere where there's a group of people that are willing to stand up and say, we want to determine what's going on in our community. We don't want to have it forced down our throat to have a CAFO or to have a toxic plant of some sort, being put in our community. So that's something that can happen. I know there are people that have been talking about this here in Jefferson County for a while, but that's something that can take place. The other thing I want to kind of also say is that we, as a culture, have been, due to social media, more and more, affiliations with our political parties, if we have them, we're becoming more and more isolated amongst our peers and not across the board with people that have different opinions than us. And it's because I think we really don't reach out to community members. We don't reach out to people that might feel similar to us in some ways, but different in other ways. And this is like a personal thing that each one of us, I feel, need to really kind of look at our lives and how we're handling our lives and what opportunities we might have to meet with people that don't necessarily think like us, but we may have some shared values. Because this kind of divisiveness that we're seeing is just going to keep growing and keep growing. until we kind of stop putting labels on people and saying, you're an individual, I'm an individual. These are the areas that, you know, we may have some common ground, and if we don't have common ground, let's talk about it. And find out where you feel, what you feel, and where I feel, and maybe we'll come to some shared values. That is really, I feel, what's really going to start a lot of this melting that we need to start happening amongst all the divisiveness that we see in this country.
I want to add something when you talk about, I agree, I want to add something when you talk about Farm Bureau. I think I can talk to Farm Bureau members individually and find that we have a lot in common. You know, and you talk to farmers, conventional farmers. I've even sat across the table from CAFO operators, sat around a table where I was the only one there that wasn't a big CAFO operator. And you know, we share a lot of the same common values, but the problem is when you get into a public arena, they feel obligated to speak this particular line, and I understand why. Because if they stand up in public and say anything different, then they're afraid they're going to be ostracized by their people in their community and things of this nature, the people that they interact with. So I think the challenge is to deal with people individually and don't expect Farm Bureau to change their position.
I might go.
Just talk to people individually, and we can build coalitions with individual family farmers.
I just wanted to add one point, and that it really isn't just Republicans versus Democrats. When local control is taken away, Democratic leaders were complicit. They were part of the process and part of the problem, and they've been since. Democrats have been in charge all the way around and up in Des Moines, and they've not done anything to give us local control. And why, I don't know if they're just totally afraid of the Farm Bureau, or but they just, some of them don't have the money. Let's see where the money is.
David.
I think another level that should be addressed here, and it's a concerning level to me, is that when you look at the big picture, the education, the science, medical authorities are all in favor of pulling back on the CAFOs. I mean, it's been that way for a long time. There are, as John said earlier, I mean, there are hundreds of studies, you know, that show the concerns of CAFOs. And there have been a number of situations in the last few years where there was the threat of a possible pandemic type situation. And fortunately, they were able to nip it. And while all these conversations are going on, in our country, when you start to multiply the amount of raw sewage that is breeding, you know, what's in these CAFO pits, and how they're dumping it on the land and into the water, and the combination in these pits, there are literally hundreds of chemical compounds, some very serious. The studies don't even show all the interactions when you put all of those chemicals together. So I think one very serious situation that could happen is that the dam can break on this thing. And at some point, the money is going to have to yield to the common sense of medicine and science and all these studies while we still have a chance to save our environment. And it would be great if we could do it this way, through conversation and through politics. And I guess I have a more skeptical perspective just dealing with the people that I've dealt with. But there's a very real concern here. What is the ultimate, you know, where is this all leading to when you keep doing this year after year after year? It can be scary. And so I think one of the things that the other side has to realize is you can only push nature so far, that if you keep ignoring the science and you keep ignoring all of these studies, I mean, at some point, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, when do we start taking responsibility for the environment and your children and your children's children? And I think that has to be part of the conversation, because on a personal level and the politics and the money, it's like a brick wall. I've hit that brick wall, and I know what it feels like. So I wish it was not what I just said, but I see it. And a couple of times we've had the bird flu, and then there was that situation in some CAFO out in Texas from some hog CAFO. They, a very virulent strain of flu came out of it, and they were trying to trace where it came from. Well, that's the world we live in right now. And so I think that's a very real area that we as a people have to start talking about. That, it's not us and them, it's one environment. And we have to really see where this is all headed.
Okay, we have some more questions up here, so let's try to get through the questions and we'll try to keep them short, okay? Who's got the next one?
Yeah, and as another angle, because a number of you have mentioned that the deal that the CAFO operators get is not a good one, and it's surprising that that word doesn't spread, so it must be that the companies that set them up do a real good sell job. I'm just wondering if there's some way to educate the general public so they'll be wary of that and they won't be lured into it as far as future CAFOs.
Well, I'll give a very short response to that. My personal opinion is that once you make the investment, particularly if you borrowed $500,000 or $1.5 million or whatever it takes, and you're locked in, you don't go around talking about how bad it is unless you've got some way out of it. And so you go around, you try to defend a decision that big once you've made it. And I think that's a lot of the reason why the word doesn't get around. People will say, oh, I'm making a living, whatever, because, it's hard to admit that you made $1 million mistake and now you can't get out of it for the next 20 years without going bankrupt or something.
But from our point of view, we're not CAFO operators and we have that information. I'm just wondering if there's a way we could put it out there to prevent other people from being interested in getting involved in that.
Yeah, and we try to. We on the sustainable, the social responsible agriculture project, we've got 2 different people that have been involved as CAFO operators, and they go around the country and tell people of their experiences, and they weren't good.
I mean, just to make your point, I mean, I've been in situations and depositions where some of the CAFO operators are being deposed. And part of the program when they deal with the integrators is that the integrators put a great deal of money into educating these operators into their way of thinking. I've had the opportunity to talk to operators, and they have this message that they're feeding the world. They have this message that the science, the medical reports, they absolutely do not believe them. They've been prepared, they've been prepped that this could come up. They're very unfamiliar with the risks that they're putting themselves, their children, their families to by living in close proximity. So it's a very serious educational program that the CAFO industry is part of their program, in my understanding, is they pitch these folks a whole storyline, and it's very intense. And somebody's buying the Kool-Aid. But I've talked to an attorney in Des Moines, and he represents a lot of the CAFO operators that are later finding out, how indentured they are in a sense in these contracts. And there's a whole body of people that are concerned about what they signed up for. But I do believe it's education. They have to know what's going on and not just be hearing this story from the integrators, because they're not getting a full story at all, from what I understand.
The other thing that I became aware of recently is this whole many different organizations, groups of younger people, some of them in their teens, who are banding together and suing government officials for their failure to protect the environment. And I wish I could remember which state it was in, a 16, 17-year-old Native American who just organized it himself, and he's already gotten past the first stage of approval to press the lawsuit. And I'm just wondering if there are bigger things that we could also be doing at the same time.
Go to Canada.
Well, there's two things that come to mind that people don't see when they drive by a CAFO or they come to a meeting like this. And one is the integrator, the top big company with the hogs, are in league with the lender. And most times that lender is the farm credit system. And the farm credit system is a nationwide network of banks. There's not that many left. They're big. There's 60, 70, 80 billion dollar a year banks. And they go around throwing money at farmers because they have contracts with the packer. And that's the value that they get the loan on, that contract. So it's all, you talk about integrated, it's all very cleverly interwoven. And the second thing is, I can't even read those contracts. Because part of the contracts, counselor here might know more about it, I'm sure he doesn't permit them to show those contracts to anybody. They can't share with their neighbor reading the contract even. So I don't even see it. So I don't know how you get that information, from the source unless they really break the contract.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just wondering about the other issue too of, going beyond that and holding their feet to the fire, meaning the people in the legislature who are allowing this stuff to take place and destroying the environment for everyone who lives here. Those are the kinds of lawsuits that are going on now, and they're actually making progress and making those happen.
Well, I think, that's challenging the existing laws is what you're talking about, because, it's improved under the laws, and I think you can do that, not only may have to, a lot of people don't realize, that the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights basically says the enumeration of certain rights in this Constitution shall not be construed to diminish or deny others that are retained by the people. And the 10th Amendment says that powers not explicitly given to the state or to the federal government or to the state are retained by the people. So the 9th and 10th Amendments say we have the power to claim our rights if those rights, even if they're not named in the Constitution. But I don't know of anybody, that's willing to stand up yet and say, look, we have a right to clean air, clean water, and safe and healthful food because we have a right to life. And if we say that, we claim that, but we're talking about a revolution there. Let's get another question here. Okay.
But it says the state's for the people. It doesn't favor us. It gives us equal rights.
Yeah, we're the people. We got to
vote them out.
Yeah.
Just vote them out.
Yeah. Who's next?
That's what you do.
Hi. My question regards the manure that is a really and honestly precious resource. Or I don't know if it's technically a resource, but it's a material that is highly valuable in an ecosystem when it's properly, broken down. But when we store it and putrefy it with the lagoon systems or whatnot, and then drill it into the soil, it doesn't really attain the same organic matter, and it runs off and leaches away. When we have a successful moratorium, and it will happen on CAFOs, what do we do with the standing problem of all the 49 times as many pounds of manure we got?
Well, the moratorium is for the moratorium that the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture is calling for is a moratorium on new and expanding CAFOs. It wouldn't close down the CAFOs that we have now. The hopes are that when we eventually get this, and I don't think anybody's under the illusion it's going to happen in the next year or two, but it's an ongoing process that we all will need to be working toward over time. The moratorium that the Iowa Alliance is supporting is, we would have to get our water impairments down to 100. That's going to take some time. So that would give the industry a whole lot of time to come up with ways to address these issues. And truthfully, when we get this moratorium, we're going to be getting it at a point where we're making a lot of progress towards changing this system. Because, as I said, it's not going to happen overnight. You've got to start someplace. And then you'll, get to your goal as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other. And when we get to that place where we have a moratorium, then the industry is going to be undergoing changes because consumers and residents are going to be forcing these changes for, in whatever way, shape, or form that's going to happen. The industry will eventually shift. And so at some point, CAFOs, just as CAFOs started one by one infiltrating the agricultural system, one by one they'll start decreasing. And we'll just have to see how that all will flush out.
I would think a logical step is to go from liquid manure to solid manure on the ones that are there. It'll be a totally different system of handling waste, but we can compost the solid and it'll break down under an aerobic environment rather than anaerobic.
Well, another option for that 49 times the solid waste that's produced daily is anaerobic digesters. Like at the Manna Farms, Manna Colonies have a large open feedlot for cattle, and they produce, they have an anaerobic digester with 4 large turbines that take that methane gas that's coming from that anaerobic digestion of the manure, and they turn it into electricity. And the Manna Colonies is basically run on electricity from a cattle farm. That can also be done
still remains just as much solid waste in the end, mostly.
What's that?
I work to consulting compost with a biodigester company, and they still have just as much solid waste in the end with just as much question of what to do with it.
No, that's true, but you could produce energy from it. That's one thing you could use the manure for. It doesn't have to be used as liquid gold, as fertilizer, as you said. It's not the best fertilizer in the world, and because we have 6 million miles of tile in this state at minimum, no one knows exactly, but it's at least 2 miles for every man, woman, and child. As soon as that liquid manure is injected, it normally gets into a tile line, gets into a creek, gets into a river, gets into a lake. It's not a good process.
Okay, let's take another question. We're getting wrapped up to 10 o'clock. We've got one behind here. Let's see how long it takes us to get that one. I'd like to stop by 10.
Well, when this happened with the supervisors, where the whole thing went dead, I realized that we don't have that the supervisors really in Jefferson County, and I see it also in Johnson, that the supervisors have really a lot of power. And so what we really need to do is change the balance in our Board of Supervisors. And so this is a practical question, we need to find people who will run, who can be interesting enough to a broader spectrum, because in Fairfield there's definitely this wall in Jefferson County between certain, sustainable, regenerative agriculture, roofs, all that group, and then the status quo and the Farm Bureau. And so we need to find someone like maybe Francis, who could possibly appeal to a broader group of people. We need that. I'm just trying to think of what the steps would be so that we could really find somebody that would change the balance in our Board of Supervisors. So this is a very practical step, and it needs to be someone really, really viable who's also going to be appealing to the other whole big group of people. So it's just that question is who do we find and how do we get them into that position?
Well, I think we talk to people. We talk to people that are, I think, rural residents, and that would have the connections.
We have
the supervisors really. It seems like the supervisors really speak more to the rural community than they do the city community in Jefferson County. When we're all together, we're all influenced by what goes on in the county. But I think a lot of it is, we talk to people, we dialogue with people, we find out where their interests are, if they have if there's somebody that you feel might be a really good candidate, you talk it out. I mean, I'm doing that right now, you know, on a personal level. There's, you know, that there's someone I've got my eye on that, you know, I think is going to be running, and that I think would be really good, you know, for the county. And, you know, it's just a matter of keeping all the lines of communication open and exploring, but actively exploring, because this has to start now.
Right.
We can't wait till like 2 months before the election and find a candidate. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Right. And to change some of the people who've been entrenched for a long time.
So my question is, how about you? You know, everybody in this room should ask themselves, how about me?
Yeah.
I mean, I was an antique dealer, and then, you know, and Al Gore changed my life. But you're all here. You're all members or you're fans of JFAN. You're here for a reason. And if you start thinking about it yourself, running for public office, you don't have to start at the supervisor level. Like I said, you can start at city council or school board or something like that. But get involved. Get involved with your party. Start talking to neighbors. Talk to everybody else. How did Phil get elected? You know, how does anybody get elected? You start networking. And so you probably know people that you think would be good. Start planting that seed. Say, have you ever thought about running for public office? Start asking people. Say, this community needs you, needs your leadership. And so everybody should ask themselves, including you.
Phil, can you tell us how it is up there? Do you feel like you're getting anywhere?
Actually, up there hasn't started yet.
Oh.
It starts in January.
Up there. I think we're going to have to stop for tonight. We're at 10 o'clock and we need to get out of the facility, but you can carry on the conversation in private, okay? Thank you very much for coming tonight. Remember, when you go out, don't forget Alan's selling his books out here. Pick up the action steps, sign the moratorium, make a contribution of whatever amount you can on the way out. Thank you very much for coming and staying with us.
Oh my God.